Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. This latest session in our deep dive, which is focused on retail banking, financial services, deepening software quality for the robo generation. I think that means mainly our kids rather than us, but if you wish to consider yourself part of the robo generation, you're welcome to. I'm delighted to be joined in this session, which I should say is sponsored by, and we're grateful to Applause. In this session, I'm joined by Emanuele Blanco of Money Farm, by Brian Timmeny of Science Bank Corporation, and by Kristin Simonini, who's VP of Product for Applause. We're going to dive into some of the challenges of automating software quality and maintenance of software quality, and the interface between traditional software development and more agile methodology and continuous automation. Before we do, I'm going to invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves and explain a little bit about what they see as the key challenges they're currently facing. So, Emanuele, perhaps I could turn to you first.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Justin. Well, of course, being in an industry such as the fintech industry and being a scale-up organization as Money Farm is, the challenges are always there, and especially, questions around how can deliver software faster to our customer, how can deliver value faster to our customers. Of course, in a world where everybody's trying to solve similar issues, speed is important, speed is key. Automation, in my opinion, can help us really understanding what we need to, what our problems, if we have any, and we can use automation we can leverage automation really to deliver software faster. I think one of the challenges I'm actually tackling right now is how can I increase the speed of value delivery to my customers, and automation plays a big part in this challenge.
When you talk about automation of the challenge of the speed, or automation relating to the challenge of speed, what is the frequency of drop that you have? What's the frequency of drop that you aim for?
Well, one of our KPIs is really how many software releases we perform weekly. Of course, we are an organization that's 10-year old, so we don't have to deal with a large amount of legacy. We are lucky in that regards. We are aiming to release software at least 50 times per week, and I cannot really see how we could possibly do that if we didn't automate our practices, if we didn't automate our delivery process, if we didn't automate our testing. So that's really where it plays a big part.
Thank you, Emanuele. And Brian, please tell us a bit about your organization and your role, and indeed the challenge that you have of frequency of delivery.
Good morning. Thanks. So I'm currently the CTO for Zions Bank Corporation, and one of the items that I'm charged with today is how do we start to take us to the next generation of software? Specifically, how do we begin to automate some of these practices? So as Emanuele hit on, I think automation is certainly one of the key practices we want to drive, but specifically in thinking about our organization and what we're trying to accomplish, it's how do we really deliver software, but deliver it safely for our customers? And one of the most important things that we think about is how do we protect our customers' data, and how do we protect all of the information that's currently in our charge? So when we think of automation, certainly, how do we run our regression suites? How do we run our regression tests, both within our existing, and unfortunately, we are an existing organization that has been around for 100 plus years. And in that, we do have a little bit of legacy that comes with us. So as we execute in that foundation, part of what we look at is how do we automate within what we have today in the next generation of software, but at the same time, how do we automate several of those legacy practices as well? And one of the most important things we think about is how do we ensure that all of our data is part of that automation process, that security, vulnerability is part of that software cycle. So when we're thinking about deploying, certainly the automation of the deployment is important, but for us, a lot of those testing practices in terms of penetration testing, vulnerability scans, data encryption are all part of the automation that we look to ensure, so that when we do deploy, we know that we're making sure that our data is as protected as possible. And I think along that continuum, we have some generational apps that are, for example, our digital apps, our front-facing apps that deliver with much higher frequency into the monthly basis. And we have some legacy ones that are more traditional, but in either case, the automation is equally important for us to ensure protection of our customers' data and of the assets we have.
So Emanuele talked about increasing or having a specific target of a number of deliveries per week and increasing the frequency of delivery. You just mentioned that you have some deliverables that are deliverable on a monthly cycle. I think you mentioned to me previously some are on a weekly cycle, and others are on a much longer cycle. So is there an aspiration to get to a more frequent app style deliverable timing?
Yeah, I think there's two pieces that we think about, and one is related to, I'll call it the foundational security of our application suite, and then the customer experience. And when we think about aspirationally in terms of how quickly are we able to push out things such as vulnerability patches, security scans, encryption routines, those are things we strive to bring out almost on a weekly basis, and we do. We have deployments of those on a very frequent basis. When we think about the overall now customer experience, the question now comes to crossing many applications. So we're across ATMs, we're across digital experience, we're across service, branches, banker experience. And so for us, we absolutely want code drops on a more frequent basis, but all of those are also very coordinated to create a cohesive experience for our customers. And why that's so important, and where automation also plays into that, is now automating the coordination of those entire releases of the test suite, not only for a specific application, but across the entire release. And I think for us, aspirationally, to continue to improve those experiences on a monthly basis is really where we sit, I would say, more on the incumbent bank side.
Thank you. Let me bring it to you, Kristin. We've heard from the customer's point of view, from your point of view, the customer's point of view, from the financial institution's point of view. Tell us a little bit about your role at Applause, but then what are the challenges you see for your customers, for other financial institutions?
Sure. Yeah. So thank you for having me, Justin, and pleasure to be with all of you. So for those of you not familiar with Applause, Applause is the worldwide leader in enabling digital quality, and I am the VP of product at Applause. We do work across industry, but we support a number of customers in the financial services and technology realm. We provide both quality testing, be that manual and automated testing, usability, accessibility, and security, as well as other practices. So we do that through a global tester community, which allows us to provide the coverage and the voice of customer across geos, across languages, across devices, and basically provide that extra insurance that the experience is going to be critical. I, as a product professional, like my peers, am sort of being tasked every day with delivering more, faster, but also with an expectation of high quality. And sometimes those things, in the past, historically, that's been a challenge, right? You have to kind of get one or the other sometimes, speed or quality. Getting both has been a historic challenge. So that is really where Applause comes into play. I think specifically as we think, on the financial services and fintech realm, there was probably a time where we thought this ability to change brands, which is so easy for customers these days, that perhaps banking was a little immune to that, and that was a harder task. And I think we're finding that's not the case. Customers are not customers for life, even in financial services. And so, with the advent of more of these digital experiences, customers can make that change. And that's where that quality is important, because the customer can, move on a dime if they have a bad experience with your products. And so we're really seeing, more of that push. Yes, in security, as Brian mentioned, that is certainly an area where our customers are looking for more testing and assurances. but also in, just getting those products to market more quickly with more eyes on them that meet all the different use cases of their end customers, so that they can ensure that while they're getting that speed to market, they're also getting the quality that they need.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristin. Emanuele, if I can come back to you, you've obviously already explained that you're highly dependent on having a high degree of automation in your testing in order to be able to do the frequency of drops that you do. Are there any areas that have proven particularly difficult to automate? Are there any areas where you've had particularly significant gains from implementing automation?
Well, we started doing automated testing a while back in terms of our customer-facing application. Now, of course, one of the biggest challenge we have is about mobile, right? There's a lot of different devices. We do have customer apps for both major platform, Android and iOS. It's a lot of platforms out there. There's a lot of different Android devices, for example, while on iOS it's a bit more stable. And the tools for doing testing automation on the mobile devices weren't that mature. I think the landscape is improving greatly. And for us, this is key. This is important, especially with a channel like a mobile app. When once you go to the customer, you cannot really easily roll it back, right? It's not on your servers; it's in the customer's devices. So there's a high risk in releasing something which has a glitch or a bug, and sometimes you cannot really do much after you ship the release. So I think that would be one of the biggest challenge. And then, of course, historically, as an organization which is pretty young in the sector, and when you're a startup, you need to go to the market, and you need to go to the market fast, because you really don't have a lot of money, and your ability of getting things wrong decreases a lot, especially at the beginning. At the beginning, testing wasn't something that in the very early stages of a startup you think about doing in a very scalable way, right? At the beginning, it's all about going to the market. But then the challenge, of course, is as we grow up the organization, as more customers, we have a duty on our customers. We need to make sure that we release quality software. So challenge there is also like the mindset of the people, which, like making sure that really we consider testing and we spend enough time on automation and all of that. So I would say those have been the two biggest challenges in my time at Moneyfarm.
Have you applied automation in the area of accessibility testing, which I know is an area where it can be notoriously challenging to automate, and often crowd testing is adopted, or specialist advisory testing?
We haven't directly done that. Accessibility is one of our concerns. Of course, we discuss about it a lot, but I don't think we reached yet the maturity level to instill automation into that kind of testing where we are. Yeah.
And Brian, perhaps I can bring this across to you. Are there areas where you feel you've had particular success in automating, and are there areas where you still have particular challenges with implementing automation?
Yeah, so I would say, starting a bit with the challenges, when we talk about the full suite of end-to-end testing, I think that's a place that remains complex, because when we talk about creating automated testing for a single application, for a single suite, for a single set of connections, for example, our digital facing assets, those are pieces where we're really able to start to get our arms around. But when we really start talking about the integrated tests in terms of the experience you have at the bank, the experience you have when you call in, the experience at the ATM, the experience on mobile, and ensuring that all of those experiences are consistent, that's the place where testing definitely has some areas to mature for us. And I think that's a place where we're placing a lot of focus to ensure consistency of those test suites across all of those applications, to give us one consistent experience. On the other side, I think one place we're making pretty strong headway is that once we release a product, that for us is not necessarily the end. It's kind of the beginning, because the other part is then we have to support the product. We have to support the experience that goes out as a result of that release and of the new changes to the application suites that we have. And within that, beginning to also automate the processes behind that, and the testing of those processes behind that is the other part for us that's really starting to come of age. And why that's so important is because it's not simply that someone logs into the mobile device, they're able to process their transaction and then success, but rather we're building for the scenario when that doesn't work and they need to jump across channel, they need to call in, they need to be able to go to the ATM, they need to be able to go to the branch. As that experience sort of begins to evolve and we start to think about that overall customer experience, ensuring that we have the processes that can catch up to that and ensuring that we can really test those processes as well behind the scenes is really important for us. So the ability to not only automate, I'll say, our testing and digital assets, but actually automating the processes, handoffs, and then testing those in conjunction with those digital assets is the next place where we're seeing some great headway.
That's very interesting. In an earlier conversation around some of the challenges of operating exchanges, very different kind of a challenge, but the common thread from what you've just said was that it was part of the CTO's job linked to the line of business to figure out what's meant to happen when the software can't do it, can't do whatever it's meant to do. It's not just about building software that works. There will inevitably be outages. There will inevitably be unexpected experiences that software wasn't designed for. And you're saying that's the handoff area in this case that needs to be thought through, that may or may not in the end be able to be automated. So that's a particular challenge, describing the full workflow user experience.
That's exactly it. And I think the part about that that's important is because it's really, I think as we think about next generation software, that's really the next evolution of how we think about deployment, because it's not only now deployment of when we deploy it, is it a great experience? We think about that coordinated experience in terms of when it goes well and needs a handoff, and when it doesn't go well, what happens? Because when that doesn't go well, there is a glitch, as Emanuele kind of alluded to, that happens in software. And when that does happen, what becomes of the customer experience, and how do we ensure that that overall experience is protected, even if something goes wrong within a single channel? And being able to think about those next scenarios and automate those next scenarios is also part of what's coming into our frame of thinking, both about testing and about customer experience overall.
So, Kristin, that's a neat segue to a question I wanted to ask you, because it seems to me that as firms are thinking about automating processes, it's not just a technical challenge; it's a mindset challenge. Have they thought through the workflow of testing? Have they thought through the user experience workflow, which is a separate thing again? And only when they've thought through that, is it appropriate to then try and apply automation tools? Do you find that in delivering to your customers that you have to do more or less that consulting part ahead of figuring out the deployment?
Yes, definitely. And I think, some of the challenges that we've talked about so far are understanding the balance that it's a testing strategy. And as part of that strategy, there are things that you can automate and there are things that do not lend themselves to that. And so partnering obviously with customers to understand, what they're trying to do, the maturity of the products, the workflows, who they're touching, the frequency of that, to really kind of figure out where that testing should live and how much of that you can easily automate. And, we certainly see customers all the time who kind of go all in and say, we're going to automate everything. And then they sort of have to backtrack on that a little bit because they've identified that not everything is appropriate for automation. It's really great for, regression testing and testing sort of common flows in your products that you expect not to change over time, but new feature testing or end-to-end customer experience or combination digital in-person experiences where you want to know, did the app do its part, but how was that in-person experience when they went, to the branch or had an interaction with support? So finding what that balance should be and working with customers on that strategy is definitely part of a consultation I think, we're seeing. Also, as we develop products, even on the technology side of it, we just launched a codeless automation product that's focused on mobile applications. And, after going through a variety of applications and testing them, you very quickly start to see that there are some things that lend themselves to that very nicely, and other situations that don't, based on the content or how things have been created. So, that's where we can help. And I think, best practices are really needed as people sort of feel their way through this, this transition that they're trying to make. And it comes at a high cost. Automation doesn't come cheap. And so, ensuring that you are setting it up the right way and relying on those automation resources where you need them and not where you don't, I think is the balance, and finding that mix. Otherwise, I think customers will hit a wall pretty quickly and find a lot of frustration.
You talked there about the sort of different components of the process. And of course, we're seeing very standardly, I would say, in the financial services community, people have different operating models for those different components. So they might have one part of the development that is pretty agile, pretty fully DevOps, and another part of the process is pretty much still very traditional waterfall. Does that present its own special challenges in automating testing overall, or elements of the testing?
Yes, I think it can. I mean, certainly if, organizationally different business units are set up, with different approaches, I think that's where we certainly find we just need the flexibility to have the more traditional end of sprint build handoff for testing, but also be able to support our customers that are releasing, with multiple times within a day and looking for quick response, to make sure that they're putting out quality. So, we can put that testing also effort in the hands of the developer. I've completed this story, I've completed this ticket, I'm going to change the status of it, it's ready for QA. I can actually send that immediately to the crowd and get my response back while I'm developing. That needs to be in place to support customers working at a rapid capacity, but they may have other teams that are following a more traditional approach, or maybe historic approach now, we would say. And I think it's, is it a challenge? Sure, but it's not an insurmountable one. I think it's just about finding the right fit for all the different groups involved.
So bringing that to you, Emanuele, you presumably, if you're doing 50 deliverables a day, 50 releases a day, then I presume there's a fair element of DevOps taking place, which presumably also implies that the developers are managing their own test scenarios. Does that, you've already said that that is substantially dependent on having a high degree of automation, but is there a kind of clean break between manual testing and automated testing within those DevOps groups, within those scrums and rapid deployment processes?
Well, firstly, it's 50 a week. I wish it was 50 a day. That would be a bit. That would be a bit.
I'm talking about in the next quarter. I appreciate you're on the way there.
I like your aspiration. Well, definitely, it's a fine line, right? I mean, in order to deliver fast, definitely the testing process has to be embedded. We tend not to hand tickets over to QA, because in our opinion, that kind of creates silo. And I think in order to deliver faster value, we want to break silos rather than try and build in silos. But the key fact is, like, we need to have the core competencies about testing in the team. And, automation testing is something that I think the engineering community gets quite easily right now in 2021, because it's kind of an evolution of the software engineer role. Like, automation is code, right? Put engineers at coding, they'll feel happy. Even they're writing tests, which, some people in the past would think, well, it's different kind of job. Developers and engineers would be happy in general, they would do that. However, I don't think that's purely everything automated is a substitute for good practices like session-based testing, exploratory testing, and all of that. So I think as leaders of technology organization, is our goal to embed in the teams those capabilities and make sure that everybody put their weight and contribute towards that. Because, you know, one very famous computer scientist, Dijkstra, said that testing shows only the presence of the bugs, not the absence. And, you know, it's always about risk mitigation. You're testing, and, you know that some issues, you may not find them, or you have regression. And when you have regression, basically say, well, if I change this wouldn't break. But yet you don't know what's going to happen with a different situation, right? And that's important, I think, to have in teams exploratory testing capabilities. Now, can it be the developer? Can it be dedicated QA people? Can it be the product managers, the product owners as well? Because, you know, like, quality is something that is very close to the product function in an organization. You know, it's a joint effort. And I think, you know, the way forward is having cross-functional team where it's possible, and appreciate sometimes it may not be possible because maybe you have devices that are in the branches, and you know, and on my side, it's a bit easier because I manage a digital product. But in some cases, like Brian, like if they have ATMs, I mean, it's a different kind of challenge. But for what I can see, the key is to bring those capabilities inside the team and making sure that the teams are committed to build a quality product. And then how you do that, you know, automation test or session-based testing, exploratory testing, it really, you know, you can kind of show them the way, and then the team can self-organize and actually deliver on that.
Brian, you're responsible for, it's fair to say, a more traditional firm. I think that you mentioned you'd been around about 150 years, I think, so far. And based on that, I would imagine you do have some legacy, not just software, but legacy processes as well. Do you find the joins between agile development, waterfall development, create specific challenges around the question of automation?
We do. So I think there's a couple of practices. So firstly, we're beginning the process of moving everything to a scaled agile framework. So we're certainly moving in that direction overall. But that said, everything's not there yet. And I think one of the most important practices that we're driving is, how do we build a componentized infrastructure, and how do we build a componentized architecture at the software level? The reason why that's so important is because once we can start to create these more micro components, we have the ability to now establish more discrete testing against those components. And then the expectation of how, for example, our mobile experience operates with other processes within the bank becomes a specific connection point. And when we say specific connection point, that now we can translate it into an API or into a Kafka queue or into different discrete elements of communication that we can start to wrap our testing around. So now we're testing the functionality of the application, and we're testing all the communication channels of that application. Part of what that does is now it gives us the ability to, if one component is built in waterfall, one component is built in agile, or two different agile teams on two different arts, for example, it gives us the ability to both test the regression suite for that train, but at the same time, it gives us the ability to now test that as an integrated manner. And one other practice that Emanuele hit on that I think is really important is that you never know when you've caught all the bugs, which means that you know when you've caught all the bugs for the regression suite, but you don't know all the bugs that could ever possibly exist. And the reason why that's so important is because then when we start to think about discrete components of architecture, when we discover new things in production, new things through our testing, new things through exploratory, we're able to quickly know where to add those additional tests into the regression suite, either at the app level or at the integration level or at the entire regression level. And I think the last practice that's really important is that everywhere we can, we bring all the competencies directly into the team, which means that in some cases we're highly automated, and in other cases we're somewhat less automated. And when we think about some of those less automated components, things that are legacy assets, we do bring those testers directly in so that they can start to think about, how does this integrate with the rest of the structure? How do I actually think about this as an API, sort of as a connectivity? And then what are the elements I can take to be able to automate those tests over time? And why that's important is because then it's not a QA group separate from the app team, but instead it's in the app team itself that's constantly trying to push that boundary of being able automate the testing suites.
Now, something that you talked about there is how you gain greater efficiency. What's the most effective way of delivering test and quality? How do you measure whether you're being effective across quality? How do you measure the ROI on the testing process and on automation?
So some of the largest things we're looking at is one, how many hours are we spending throughout the test cycle in order to get to production? And for us, looking at that in terms of how many tests are able to run and how long those tests take you to run and how many times over and again you can run those tests are the main metrics we look at. And why that's important is because when we're able to manually run a suite of 1,000 tests one time moving to production, that gives you one risk profile. When you're able to automate those 1,000 tests and now run them 30 times before you end up in production, that's a second risk profile. And so when we're looking at the metrics that we're implementing, we're really always doing that with relation to what's the risk profile we're creating. And the more we're able to automate those tests, the more we're able to automate a higher level and counter those tests, and the more we're able to execute them on a daily basis, the more we're reducing that overall risk profile as really the objective metric that we have.
So it's saying how much effort are we putting into testing and how quickly can we deliver that effort on testing? That seems
That's
to be
right. Exactly. And the metric really takes away from the expectation of, is it manual, is it automated, but really takes it to, are we able to run X number of tests very quickly? How many times are we able to run them before we actually deploy into production? Automation just happens to usually win that game.
So I'm going to declare an interest. I'm responsible for our program here at QA, QA Vector Analytics, where we're building benchmarks of the efficiency of quality delivery, of quality engineering. One of the things that I recognize in what you're describing, but one of the things that we've added into that mix is the proportion of effort that is expended remediating software as opposed to doing original development, on the basis that, to be incredibly simplistic about it, if you wrote it right in the first place, that would be better than if you have to fix it as a result of the test outcome. So somehow you want to look at the meld of those components. Is that something that you look at Science?
We do look at that, but I'll honestly say we put much more priority on the speed of remediation than how much remediation. And part of why I say that is because we never know exactly the bugs that are going to get us in production, the new scenarios that we haven't thought of as we deploy, especially new software and new context within that software. And why that's important is because we always expect we'll never have perfect software. And our ability to be resilient, our ability to recover quickly, and our ability to re-add new scenarios into our overall suite is really the focus that we have, because that's what's going to let us evolve quickly over time versus an expectation of we got perfect software out there each time. We do want to make sure, though, that the number of bugs, the type of bugs, the types of issues that we're seeing, hopefully are a pretty small percentage of the overall suite. But when we do see them, the metric that we really have is how quickly can we reincorporate that into our testing so that we can deploy faster, constantly reducing that risk ratio.
So Emanuele, to pick that up and bring that to you, so one of the things that we've learned from the analytics that we've done on this issue of benchmarking software quality is exactly as Brian says, the speed of remediation as much as the sheer effort on remediation. But also one of the things that's come out is that the more fintechy organizations have a greater bug tolerance hitting production on the basis that certain types of bugs, it's okay for your users to reveal to you, as long as you remediate them quickly. Other types of bugs, not so much. But that difference of fault tolerance, difference of cultural attitude to faults and faults getting into production is something that for us marks out the difference often between a fintech approach and a traditional approach. Does that, how do you look at these challenges at Money Farm. Oh, I don't think your sound is coming through.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now we can hear you.
Sure. Sorry about that. I think, well, it's fair to say that definitely when you try to go fast, of course, there are some things in which you may be a bit more, you may tolerate a bit more the risk. Of course, not when it comes to clients' money and security, because that's paramount. And, we are very, very strict on those kind of things. But let's say the website user detail page, there's a glitch or there's a small bug, we will be happy with that. We will be happy with that going out and possibly check it later. I think, it's what we measure, for example, we try to do DevOps, of course, as good as we can. And two things that, two metrics are really key, in my opinion, for measuring that, for measuring the quality of what you deliver is how many changes fail out of all the changes you do, like the change failure rate, and also the mean time to recover. So if something goes wrong, how long would it take on average to go wrong? Because as Brian said, things will go wrong. I mean, it's impossible that things always go right? So the key competitive advantage you can have as an organization is to embrace that, minimize as much as you can, because you have a great quality process and you automate as much as you can while going fast. Yet at the same time, when something goes wrong, fix it quickly. Because, if some parts of the system goes down for 1 or 2 minutes and customers are not affected because they can still transact, well, 1 minute maybe is acceptable, 1 hour wouldn't be acceptable. So, a clear KPI for teams is really minimize that. And we're striving to minimize our mean time to recover and to decrease our change failure rate. So this is 2 things we look at it pretty much on a bi-weekly basis.
Thank you, Emanuele. Kristin, how do you support this need to be able to remediate fast, which seems to be a common theme that's coming out?
Yeah. So as Brian and Emanuele were just talking, one of the things that we introduced for our customers was the concept of a quality score that takes into consideration not just the volume of issues found, but the severity, the fix rate, the component, where does that issue live? So that customers can see that snapshot and see how their quality is trending over time and kind of understand what their baseline is. And that gives some sense of what that acceptability is or is not, for moving forward and pushing a build to production. So understanding that the issue is in a more business critical part of the application versus somewhere else, and kind of having that constant dashboard that you can sort of see repeatably is important. There is an unlimited number of issues, I feel like sometimes, that can get reported, but really digging in and finding the ones that are of the highest value so that you can apply. And, we integrate with customers, CI/CD, so we understand, what got fixed, how did it get fixed, how quickly did it get fixed, to help us drive that data on what's important or not. So that is definitely something where we see a need to support our customers. One of the other things, just to comment on, that I feel like is a common thread, is this idea of the integrated testing experience, because I think, as Emanuele put it, we can't have those things operating in silos. And so having the visibility across all of the testing is important. It can't, and this is sometimes an organizational challenge where, my manual testing and my automated testing are living in different groups. My developers are responsible for my automation. So that is definitely something where an integrated functional testing approach is key. And that's where the technology also comes into play, so that we can take some of this demand for automation out of the hands of the developers, because it doesn't scale, it's not cost effective, and they don't often represent the business users. So things like codeless development, codeless automation, this is where they're seeing a surge, right? Because there's an opportunity to spread out, fan out those responsibilities for the quality, but still getting you to kind of an automated place and getting you the speed that we're all driving for.
Thank you. We're actually running right down on time, but a very quick hit thought from each of Brian and Emanuele. What's the next thing for automation on either of your agenda? Brian, what's the next target for automation?
So for us, one of the next big thing is to be able to bring in machine learning into our overall suite, so that not only are we thinking about it from an individual perspective, but also aggregating the results of what we're doing across our suites.
Thank you. And Emanuele?
Well, right now we're trying to even further automate our infrastructure deployments. So, transitioning into Kubernetes and making sure that we can automate infrastructure deployment, scaling up, scaling down, to be more efficient and also to be more reactive to load.
Okay, that's great. And Brian and Emanuele and Kristin, thank you so much for your contribution.